Hello, hello, hello. It's Flipaster here again with a new guide, and this time I'm going to be going over all the Infernal units, buildings and abilities and just shortly explain what they do, what they are good against, when you want to make them or use them. And of course, this is all very subjective. Other players may not agree with my take on some units, but this is my channel, so bear with me, please. So, starting with the Imp. This is your basic worker unit. There's nothing much to say about them except that it's a ranged unit. So that makes them somewhat good for sniping units that are harassing you, for example. And next. Oh, one more thing I might as well mention is that you can research a flame on ability for them in your ritual chamber. And it's basically an ability that people don't use, but I'll explain it anyway. It turns them into Baneling from StarCraft 2. You're basically paying to make them an exploding unit. And they do decent damage. But because you are trading your workers for that ability, it's usually not something to consider. Most people are not using it, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you want to be very funny, you can research it and use those. But generally speaking, it's not something you should consider. Next is your Hexen. You always start the game with one Hexen. And honestly, that's all you need to know about Hexen. You don't want to make more of them. There are some builds where you can use Hexen for some funny stuff, but generally speaking, you just take your starting Hexen and get what value you can out of it, and never build more in any matchup. It has very low attack, which can attack air, and it starts with the Skull of Sheda ability, which deals a bit of damage. I think it's 30 damage, it doesn't say it here for some reason. But more importantly, it infests that unit. So, if I use the creep, you can see the symbol here, and it's now infested. If it dies while it is infested, it's going to spawn you a fiend. Of course, it's not gonna die now. Marching on. But that's the main ability of the Hexen. You can also research two other abilities for Hexen from the ritual chamber. And if you want to be just do something for fun, you can do that. The first is Venom Trap, which is actually pretty decent in early game. What it does is it does a 50 damage trap. It's like a buried Baneling from StarCraft 2 pretty much. And also when it exploded, it infests all the affected enemies. You can also stack them up like this. For example, it takes 3 of them to kill this slime camp. So if you have researched that, then one Hexen can take out this camp. Like this. And because they are all infested, they turn into fiends on death. And the third ability of Hexen is Miasma. This used to be a very powerful AoE spell. It's been nerfed so that it's not very good now. It takes too much energy, and basically whenever you cast it, you will only be able to use it once because of the energy cost, and it's a channeled spell. And the damage is not that high. It will also infest the enemies and turn them into fiends if they die. So of course, if you have it, it's gonna be useful in big battles, but it's probably not very game breaking. Like, I've tried using it, and it's just not very good. So generally speaking, those are the Hexen abilities. But you don't really want to research the abilities, and you don't want to make more Hexen. And lastly, it also has a Shroud Beaver ability, which a few other units also have, and you can use this to teleport to your base, basically. It can target either on Shrine or a Tower, and it teleports the Hexen back there. So basically, the main use of this ability is that if you're using Hexen to scout, then instead of walking back, or for example, if a scout, the enemy dog is about to kill you, you can use the teleport to get back to your base and save the Hexen. So that was the Hexen. Then we go to our Iron Vault. This is one of the 2 unit production facilities, well 3 actually, as Infernal. And you can get the basic brute from here. For at the moment it costs 125 Luminite. And what you get out of that is very all around very weak and poor unit. Brute is not really good for anything, except dying and giving you more animus. But because your other tier 1 unit, Gaunt, is super weak, you still need them to kind of like tank for your army. Because they have more armor and more hit points. And the main scenario where you want to make Brute is early game against Vanguard, because it's the only tier 1 unit that can fight Lancers. And also against Infernal, you need them in your army, because a Gaunt only army is too weak. A few Brutes will destroy that army. And they have one ability, which is to kill themselves and turn into 2 fiends, and they have an upgrade, Soulforged Ascendants, which turns them into 3 fiends instead of 2, gives them more armor. Generally speaking, it's not an upgrade you want, but I'm showcasing it anyway. And the reason you don't really want it is because Brutes are generally pretty bad. It's not worth investing more in. And they have a second upgrade at tier 3, which is completely useless. You should never get this one. It increased the attack speed of fiends by 100% for 10 seconds when you are using Sundered Soul. Not when a brute dies, only when you suicide the brutes. So that's a completely useless ability, don't get it. The next unit from Iron Vault is a tier 2 unit. So you need your shrine at level 2 to get it. And that's the Modon. Modon has a lot of uses. It's actually like the highest DPS unit you have in the game, because of its trample ability. You want to be making Magmadons. Usually you want one fast Magmadon against a Vanguard player, because it's how you can stop mass Lancer pushes. It both deals good damage versus heavy targets, including Lancers, and also this trample ability does good AoE damage, 100 AoE damage over 6 seconds, and extra 80 against heavy, for example Lancers. So that's 180 damage versus Lancers. And also, if you have upgraded this Demon Hoof Tremors from Hellforce, it also adds a stun to that ability. This stun upgrade is usually not a high priority. You just want to use the Magmadon for the AoE damage. And you can see the AoE damage and stun in effect against this creep camp here. It makes them very strong against from mid game to late game. Like even in the very latest game, this is your only unit that really has a high DPS in the game. You can make like 10 of them and use their trample at the same time, and it's gonna deal like 1000 AoE damage. So it's a very important unit for Infernal. But generally speaking, you only want them against Infernal and Vanguard. And against Infernal, you usually want like, this is your main unit, like the only unit you really want in your army in endgame. And against Vanguard, you want a lot of them in general. But against Celestial, you usually don't make them, because they are not that effective, and for example, Archants click them down very fast, they do extra damage to heavy. All the units you make out of Iron Vault are heavy units, that's something to bear in mind. And all the units you make out of Conclave are light units. So, next unit out of Iron Vault is Hellborn. It's a very cool unit, but it's a bit of a trap. It's also a tier 2 unit. It has a long range, can do splash damage, can also attack air. So it feels like it would be a very good unit to have in your army. However, the DPS of Hellborn is actually very low. And they have one upgrade, which you get on tier 3, and that's the Molten Touch. And that makes them do AoE damage over time effect on the targets they hit. And this is the first time, after you have this upgrade, they suddenly turn very good for your army. Before that, you don't really ever want them, with the one exception. But basically, their base target deals 50 damage normally, and 50 damage extra against buildings. And this 50 extra damage against buildings makes them good when you are getting proxied by Celestials who are like building a base right next to you, basically, with defensive towers. Then usually Hellborn is the only way you can break that, so in that case you want Hellborn out fast. But other than that, you don't really want them before you can get the tier 3 upgrade. They do have splash damage, but it affects the units that are behind the initial target, and it only deals 25% of the damage. So it's not like super high damage. I'll show it to you.
Blazing a trail.
So we are shooting this one here. You can see that the unit behind it is like very slightly getting damage. However, this Molten Touch is what's actually dealing damage here, because it applies to a lot of units in the enemy army, not just a few. So you can light like the whole enemy army on fire, and it adds a lot of DPS to your army. So in late game, the tier 3 upgraded Hellborn is good in all matchups, and it's kind of important for your overall army composition. But until you have the tier 3 upgrade, you don't want them except against an aggressive Celestial to take down buildings, basically. And that was the Iron Wult units. Next we go to Conclave. Like I said, all the units out of Conclave are light units. So units that deal extra damage to light are good against these. So first is the tier 1 unit Gaunt. It's a cheap unit and you get 2 of them for the price of 1. But it's also a very weak unit. It only has 80 hit points with 20 shroud armor. And it does some damage. It has like decent DPS, but not very high. It deals more damage against light units, so it's good against, for example, Spriggans, air units in general. It's your main counter to them. And also against Infernal and Celestial, it's your main damage unit. Like, you want to be mostly making Gaunts until you transition to like end game against Infernal and you just make Magmadons, because Magmadons will kill them so fast with Trample ability. But the main ability that they have, in addition to their low to decent DPS, and they have a bit of like a bouncing damage, but again it's very low damage. But you can research the Plague Access in your Ritual Chamber. It's a very cheap and fast upgrade, costs 50 Therium, 50 Luminite. And when you have that, your Gaunts will infest on the enemies when they are standing on Shroud. And by that I mean when the Gaunt is on Shroud, which is this grey area here. And this is how you can spawn a lot of fiends for your army. So you always want to have Shroud when you are fighting. For example, if you go to this camp here, which doesn't have Shroud there yet, you can use your Effigy ability to give you temporary Shroud here, and now you will be able to apply Infest to all these enemies, so that when they die you will get more fiends. And this is a very important mechanic for Infernals. So their main function in your army is to apply Infest, really. Against Celestials that is especially important, because you need those fiends against like Argent armies, for example. They are kind of just like soaking the high damage shots from Argents. Against the Vanguard, it's a fairly useless unit, because Lancers kill Gaunts very easily, and also Gaunts deal very low damage to Lancers, and Fiends also get killed by Lancers like immediately, so they don't really add anything to your army. So you may want a few Gaunts in your army just for applying the Infest to the Vanguard army, but generally you don't want to make many of them. Except for anti-air in some cases. And the second unit out of Conclave, this is actually also a tier 1 unit, but you need to make the Ritual Chamber before you can make it. And you can basically make more Hexens. And it's a fairly expensive unit Therium wise. And you don't want to make them unless you're doing like some funny tech rush build with Hexens. So generally speaking, you always ignore this. And the second one is very important, that's Beaver. They have been buffing, they have been nerfing this unit, but it's even after all the current nerf, it's still an essential part of your army as Infernal player against both Vanguard and Celestial. And Beaver does a few different things. First of all, they have this special attack that deals percentage-based damage when they are attacking the enemy. This makes them very strong against high HP enemies, like enemy tech units like Vanguard Vulcan, for example, or high HP creep camps. And I can show that on the siege camp, for example. But they also move very slow when they are not on Shroud. You can speed up their movement by having them move on Shroud. You can see the difference very immediately here. So that makes them a bit tricky to move around the map. And the main reason you want them is for their last ability, which they have from the beginning. This has two uses, but mainly you are using this to counter enemy tech units. It takes 40 energy, and they regen energy pretty slowly. However, it's super powerful for disabling enemy units. Well, first of all, I'll show you the damage against this kind of super high HP camp. You can see how much damage it's taking from a single hit from the Beaver, compared to all of your other army fighting this unit. So it's very effective against that kind of tech units.
Capture point secure.
But, like I said, the main use is the lash. And this has a range of 10, which is fairly long. It's not huge. For example, you may have trouble lashing sabers from Celestials. But you want to be using them against Magmadons, against Hellborn, against sabers from Celestial, especially against Vulcan from Vanguard and Atlas, that kind of stuff. Like basically any expensive tech unit. And it's going to pull that unit to your army and stun it for a little while. So in most cases you can just kill the unit like that. So this is how you are basically countering tech units as Infernal. And it's pretty much your only way to do that, and that's why they are so important.
Capture point secure.
The problem is that they cost 200 Therium, which is very high. So if you see that the enemy is going for some kind of tech rush, you may need to prioritize putting all of your Therium into Weavers very heavily. For example, against a fast Vulcan rush from a Vanguard player, getting a Weaver out is usually like the only way to stop that. They also have consumability, which actually Magmadons also have. I forgot to mention that. This is a decent ability to keep in mind, and what it does is it can kill a nearby fiend or a Fellhog, which is the unit that these meat farms are spawning, to get all of your white health back. And that can be useful in battle to keep them alive a bit longer. So for example, you can see that all the white health is gone. Now I will use the consumability. It's gonna eat one of the fiends and all of its white health is back. So it gets like 120 extra health from that ability. So because there are expensive tech units and fiends are like completely useless trash units, it's something to keep in mind. And lastly, Weavers also have the Shroud Weave ability that Hexens also had, and that makes them slightly better to keep alive on retreat or moving them around the map. Lash can also be used on friendly units. It's generally not something you want to waste your energy on, but you can do it because if you see that the tech unit is about to die, Lash will actually give it all white health back when you are pulling it. So you can sometimes save a unit with it. So, that was all the land units you can make, basically. With the exception of Fellhog. Let's talk about them as well. So, Meat Form automatically spawns Fellhog. And while it's not a unit you can control, it's actually a somewhat useful defensive unit. One meat farm will spawn up to 3 of them, and then they will keep dying. But they do 2 things for you. First of all, the meat farm itself will gives you 10 extra supply. But also when the Fellhawks spawn, they will increase your supply limit by 2 more each. So actually 1 meat farm will give you up to 16 supply. And if you place them near your production, for example, they will protect it from run-bys. And also, if you are fighting like, let's say there's a Celestial proxying here, it's actually a decent defense to make a bunch of meat farms here, because they will keep defending your front line and archers will waste their energy fighting them. So while it's not really a noteworthy unit, it does have some combat use as well. And then we have our flying units, and you make them out of the Twilight Spire, which requires tier 2 before you can make it. And the first is Shadow Flyer. This is like your panic anti-air counter unit. It's pretty good for quickly taking down air units, but it's not very cost efficient in general. For example, you will need to make 2 batches of Shadow Flyers against a drop. So you can take down a dropship with 4 of these, if you can intercept it. They deal, I believe it was 50 damage, I don't actually, oh here, yeah. 50 damage with some extra against heavy. And they also lowered the armor of the enemy by 50. And I'm not gonna talk too much about armor. It basically means that they will take extra damage after that. So it makes the units easier to kill. Oh, I can't do it on my own unit, so I can't really show how it works. But basically it's like a panic counter air unit. And it's good against enemy Spriggans. It's good against enemy Vanguard helicarriers. It's alright against Celestial sites, which you don't see that much at the moment. And it's pretty good against the enemy Infernal Dragon. And those are pretty much the scenarios where you want to use it. In general, you don't want to make them overall, because Spriggan is like a better value flying unit. However, Spriggan requires you to have a Shadow Cleft as well before you can build them out of the Twilight Spire. Well, let's talk about Spriggan. Spriggan is a very useful, versatile air unit. It's fairly fast. It has a very high attack speed even though the damage is low. But it's basically a siege unit. It deals extra damage to heavy units, and that means most buildings as well. So they can kill buildings pretty fast. And they can kill Vulcans from Vanguard, and for example, Sabers from Celestial. But the main scenario for them is to fly around and kill bases. They're very good against Celestial base defenses, for example. They are not strong against light units at all, because they deal double damage against heavy targets. So they cannot fight the Gaunts. They are not very good against Exos. You can use them against Exos as like part of your force, just for the slow effect. Because the Exos are also not super good against them, but they are very bad against Gaunts. And also very bad against Hornets from Vanguard. So the use scenarios where you want to use them, they're basically always good against Celestial, with the exception of Vectors. You never want to fight Vectors with these guys. But otherwise, it's a very good all-around unit against Celestial. Against the Vanguard, it's pretty good against Bio, and it's good against Vulcans. But if the opponent is making Hornets, you don't want to have Spriggan, because Hornets will kill them very fast. And also they are not very good against Hedgehogs, which are decent counter to them. You can see they don't deal much damage against these, but they have very high attack speed. And for example, against these camp which has like a heavy unit, they will deal more damage. I can show you that. Sorry, not this one. These are not heavy, I believe. But these units are heavy. I don't actually see it anywhere on their profile, but I believe this unit is heavy, so you can see them taking a lot of damage from spears. So it's generally good against any heavy units and buildings. Other than that, it also gives you slow. It starts with a 30% slow debuff from the attacks. And it goes up to 60% with an upgrade from the Conclave. The upgrade is alright, you may get it if you're making a lot of Sprigans, like why not? But it's not like absolutely essential. And the final unit out of Twilight Spire is your Harbinger, and this is your unit transport. It's very useful for making drop plays. For example, Gaunt drop is pretty popular, making a bunch of Gaunts, loading them into a Harbinger and taking them to an enemy mineral line, basically. And you can also upgrade his seismic slam ability at tier 3 from the Conclave. And that is a very good ability, but it's usually not worth researching because you don't really make Harbingers. Like, you may have one, and even with one, it can be useful. Because it's a very powerful upgrade, but generally speaking, it's not a high priority. So what this upgrade does is that when your transport is landing, you can put units there by just right-clicking, like this, either with the unit or with the dropship itself. So when it lands, they will automatically come out of the Harbinger, but also if you have this upgrade, it's going to stun all the units around like this for 2 seconds, and that's pretty powerful. But of course, it's not a very high HP unit, so it's kind of hard to fight in the middle of an enemy army. But if you can do it, it can be very powerful. You can lift it up and you can put it down again. It doesn't have a very long cooldown, so that is potentially pretty powerful. And that is all the units you can actually produce, but there is one more unit you can make out of your Elder Shrine. So when you have tier 3, you can summon the Flate Dragon. This is a bit of a weird special unit. It's basically like a tier 3 unit, but you don't really build it normally. You can only make one of them at a time, and then it has a 5-minute cooldown before you can summon another one. And in addition, it costs 700 Therium and 700 Animus, so it's very expensive. And it takes 150 Animus, which usually is the most limiting factor, because Animus is usually very tight for Infernal. But it's a very powerful support unit. It's not really a fighting unit, even though it does decent damage, 90 damage and plus 50 against structures. So it is like decent target damage. And it also infests targets. But the main reason it's so good for support is that it has the Parasitic Soul upgrade, which is like an aura that nearby units will spawn an extra fiend when they die, and that lets your army really snowball in a fight. So instead of one fiend from a dying unit, you will get 2 fiends. And against both Infernal and Celestial, that's very strong. Against one card, like we said before, fiends don't really do much, so it's still useful, but not that useful. And they start with the basic ability Fetid Breath, which is basically an AoE infest on enemy, so it's a decent support ability for easily infesting the whole enemy army. And I can show it on the camp here. So we just target on the ground next to enemies and they get infested. And now when they die, they will spawn 2 fiends. And they have second ability that you can research from your Conclave. and that is the Inhale Poison ability, which is decent. It's not super important, but it's decent for keeping your dragon alive and making them do a bit more damage. And what that does is, once you have infested enemies nearby, you can inhale the infest from the enemies instantly, dealing the damage that the infest would deal over time, and also converting that damage into white health for the dragon. So it's like a self-healing ability, basically. Gives them a bit of extra health, while also dealing a bit of extra damage, although the cooldown is fairly long. And that is all the units. So next let's go over the rest of the buildings that I didn't already talk about. So shrines are like your basic hub that lets you gather resources nearby. It also spawns Shroud around it. And of course, Shroud has a few different uses that we have talked about before. The main thing is that all your units, or Infernal units in general that are on Shroud, generate this white health, which is like an extra shield or extra health or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't have an official name. And you can upgrade it to Greater Shrine for tier 2 units and upgrades, and then finally to Elder Shrine for tier 3 units and upgrades. Well, upgrades in this case, unless you count this as a tier 3 unit. Meat Farm we already talked about. We talked about the Iron Vault and Conclave, your production facilities. This was the air unit upgrade facility, Shadowcleft. And then we have the Twilight Spire, which is both required for your tier 3 upgrade and produce your flying units. And then we have your defensive structures. In addition to Meat Farm, which can be counted as a defensive structure, you have your Shroud Stone. Now, Shroud Stone is like your basic defensive structure that can shoot air as well. But the thing is that it's not very good. So you may want to put one on like a base that's far away, that's difficult to defend, so it's just gonna buy you a bit of time. But it doesn't deal a lot of damage, and it's not like very durable. So overall it's kind of a bait, because it costs you 100 Luminite to make, and also you lose an imp to make it, so it's actually 150 Luminite, which is a lot of money. However, you can also upgrade it to Wraithstone once you have tier 2. And Wraithstone is a very powerful defensive structure, one of the best. And what this does is that instead of attacking at all, you can see this aura around the Wraithstone, and any units within that aura will get 40% reduced movement speed, which is a lot, and lose 20% of their health per second. So it's dealing constant damage to everything in this area and slowing them down. So that can really turn around defensive battles. So, generally speaking, if you want to make like a powerful defense on some outpost, you will want a Wraithstone and maybe like 3 Shroud Stones around it, maybe even a few meat farms to buy you time, so that becomes a really strong position. But just Shroud Stones doesn't really do much, even if you have several of them, because the damage is pretty low. It's just like a support defensive structure. And you don't really want to make them in early game if you can avoid it. Maybe one if the enemy has like an aggressive opening and you are going economically. And I believe that covers all of the buildings as well. So lastly, let's talk about the Infernal abilities, which are these top bar abilities. All of them cost you Animus, which you generate basically slowly, passively, and also from all of your units dying. Like one supply of units dying gives you 1 Animus. So the first one is Summon Effigy. And this is very important ability, because it lets you spread your creep, Shroud around the map. It got buffed in a recent patch in the way that what this Summon Effigy basically does is that you use it anywhere that you can see, and you get a 5 hit point effigy with a 20-second cooldown. And it gives you Shroud around the area, which lets your unit regenerate and apply Infest. But because it has only 5 hit points, any unit that can like kill it with 1 hit. It's possible to make it permanent by casting it again after the first one expires and before the Shroud has completely disappeared. So now when it's permanent, it has 100 hit points, and also, like I said, it's permanent, so you don't need to cast it again. And the main use they actually buffed it so that if you cast it on Shroud, so that it becomes permanent, it only has an 8-second cooldown instead of 20 seconds. And that lets you actually spread your Shroud very quickly and efficiently like this, by just casting a new effigy on the edge of your Shroud. And this can be very useful for connecting your bases, for example, because it lets your Beaver move very quickly between bases, otherwise it's super slow. And also it gives you vision on the map, it gives you health regeneration, it's just very useful to spread it around the map. And the next one is Hellborn Resurgence, and this is a bit of like a panic ability. When you really need more units but you don't have any charges on your production facilities, then you can use this to recharge all of the charges on any production facility. And I actually forgot to mention these charges. Like the way that Infernal production works is that instead of having a production time and queuing up units, you can make units instantly, and after that you have like a recharge time before this can make any other unit. Like it's the same regardless of any unit. But this can stack 3 times, so when you are not building any units, you will see that I have 3 charges here, which means that I can make 3 of any units because I haven't built here for a while, and same on all the other production facilities. So this is the unique and pretty cool thing about Infernal production. You do need sufficient production because the recharge time is 35 seconds, it's pretty long. But it lets you quickly change your army composition by making many units of whatever type you want instantly. So once you have used all the charges, you can use, like you see 0 charge here, you can use the Hellborn Resurgence on this building, and now it's up to 3 charges again. And now you can make more panic units. Or you can use it for macro by making more imps, for example. So you can get 3 charges here and make more imps with that. And that's like the most recommended use of this ability, is to improve your macro. But you can also use it in a panic to make more units to survive some attack, for example. And the next unit that I accidentally used there has a 1-minute cooldown, and that's Nightfall Investation. This is a very good offensive ability that it basically applies an AoE slow in the area and also infest all the enemies. And both of those aspects are useful, but the thing is that if you are only using it for a slow, like for a retreating enemy, it's usually not worth it because you are kind of wasting that animus. But what you can do, for example, is if you are already like in melee with the enemy, then instead of letting them escape when they start to run away, you can put the Nightfall Infestation like right in front of where the enemies are going, so they don't have any way to avoid it, because they can either turn around and go straight into your army, or they will keep walking there and get slowed. And for example, with the Modon Stomp ability, that can be a very powerful combo. Like I played here, and then I use my Modon Stomp on these slowed enemies and they can run away. And of course we get more fiends out of those as well. And the next one is Shroudstone Manifestation. This is like a panic defense ability. It's very expensive at 50 animus. It gives you a free Shroudstone that attacks at double speed. And like we already talked about, Shroudstone is not very powerful. So even when it attacks at double speed, it's still not very powerful. So it can be a good like panic defense, but the 50 animus cost is very expensive. So it's best if you don't need to use that at all. And the kind of situation where you would want to use is, for example, if the enemy dives deep into a mineral line here. So if enemy is here, you don't want to put it here defensively. That's just a waste. But if the enemy is here, then you can place it here, and suddenly the enemy will take a lot of hits before they can escape from here. So you want to use it for when the enemies are already boxed into your base, for example. But it's best if you can not use that at all and save your animus. And the next one is very powerful. requires tier 3 Shadowfall. I don't use personalities nearly as much as I should. For 30 seconds, it turns the entire map into Shroud. And that of course means that your Beavers can move very fastly on the whole map, and all of your units are regaining health. And it lasts 30 seconds, which is a pretty long time in a battle. So it's a powerful ability that only takes 75 animus. And of course 75 is a lot, but compared to the value you get out of Shroudstone Manifestation for 50, it's way better. But the thing is that you don't want to use that either if you get your Dragon out, because saving the first 150 animus for the Dragon cost is a very tough thing. But in late game, when you suddenly start to have like infinite animus, then this can be very powerful. And I believe that covers all the Infernal buildings, abilities, units. I didn't specifically talk about Fiend, I guess. I talked about how it's not a very good unit when you are spawning them, when you are getting them out of the brute and so on. It has a pretty good DPS, but it has very low hit points. So it dies to like pretty much anything. The main use of Fiends is like run-bys and taking these resource camps, because it's a fast one, so if enemy has taken some of the camps, you can just send one Fiend there to take it over. Or you can like send them into the enemy mineral line to do some harassment damage, maybe kill some burgers. And those are like the main uses of Fiend. Apart from that, it's just a bit of like extra hit points and damage against Celestial and Infernal when your battles are trading blows. I mean, your armies are trading blows. So, I believe that was editing. If I missed something, let me know in the comments. For now, you can watch me pretty much daily on Twitch, twitch.tv/flipaster. And I hope to make more guides. If you have any ideas for more guides to make, for example, this kind of beginner-friendly content, just let me know. And for now, peace out.